What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we've got a longer video for you, mainly because we are going to go over a stack rank of every single tank class in the game in Shadowlands with a month out from Shadowlands release. So this is recording on September 26th. We've got a month for Blizzard to continue tweaking and making changes, so we're going to do this again in a quick update, but just wanted to give everyone just a quick overview of where everything stands in terms of the rank and file of each of the tanks and kind of where we would put them in terms of, you know, the spectrum of good versus bad. Now, what I will say before we get too far into this is that overall, tanks are in a really good place right now. They're all relatively balanced, which is kind of nice to see as you head into an expansion, but time will tell. Now, we did have some substantial changes this week, predominantly with the Death Knight, and that's probably where we're going to go ahead and start here, just because it's going to be easier. It's a little bit more fresh in terms of what people are looking for, so we'll go ahead and start there. I will go ahead and put the timestamps for when we get on to each individual class, and then I'll also put the timestamp of where everything shook out at the end, so you guys, if you want to jump around in this video, feel free. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's first start out with, as I mentioned, we'll go Death Knight. And for Death Knight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to work my way up here. I'm going to go ahead and take the Death Knight Necrolords right now and put them in the B tier. And the reason for that is because when I look at joining the Necrolords as of right now, despite it being something that's more thematic and something that fits Death Knights in terms of just kind of their upbringing and the way they were introduced to the game, the Necrolord ability right now is pretty terrible. If you're not familiar with it, it's Abomination Limb. And what it does is it provides utility essentially just in a Mythic Plus setting or in a trash type setting where you need to pull in caster mobs that are further than 8 yards away from you. It'll do that. It'll pull in mobs 8 yards or more away from you once every second, and then it'll do a good chunk of damage. So the damage is great. The reason why it's not C tier is because the DK is currently a very strong tank overall. So, you know, this is going to be our lowest scoring DK tank is the B tier right now. But the lack of utility from a tank perspective that comes along with Abomination Limb is one that I'm not too keen on signing my DK up for as it stands right now. Hopefully we got some time. Like I said, we're a month out from expansion, so there could be some tweaks. Alright, so next up for DK, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Venthyr ability. And as of right now, Venthyr ability is competing in a very strong way with DKs. We're going to go ahead and put that kind of on the borderline of A and S tier, kind of in between. It's going to straddle that line. Reason for that is because it comes with a massive runic power generation, and the Covenant skill that you get is called Swarming Mist, and once every 3 seconds, once every second you gain 3 runic power per target, up to 5 targets, so 15 runic power per second, up to, or over the course of the duration that it's up, and it's up for 8 seconds. So the other thing that it does is it passively grants you 10% dodge, so not only are you getting value in single target damage, but you're also getting value in, you know, groups of trash through all of the runic power that you're going to be generating. The runic power generation is incredibly weak when you're just dealing with a single target, but you are getting that passive 10% dodge, so that's something that makes it so that it's still worth casting. So it's going to straddle the line between S tier and A tier, mostly because Death Knights again are in a really good place in terms of tanking. They're super tanky right now. They're a lot of fun, and overall, you know, this ability just took a step up, mainly because of the nerf to Night Fae, which we're going to talk about right now. So Night Fae just went ahead and dropped down slightly below Venthyr, and after quite a bit more testing, I was kind of torn because I felt as though you know, if you go Night Fae, you're still going to be in pretty good shape. The reason why it's dropping down to an A tier, but still has potential to jump up to an S tier, is because the ability that's granted to you is called Death's Due, and Death's Due replaces your Death and Decay. Now, prior to this week's nerf, Death's Due actually granted a passive 15% stacking, so it started at 1, and every second it ramped all the way its way up to 15%. Stacking damage mitigation to you, and then it also buffed your strength by, again, 1 through 15%, and that stacked up the longer that you had Death's Due up on the target, and that was just something that was passive. What Blizzard did this week is that they made it so that it's now rotationally based on how often you can cast Heartstrike while Death's Due is up. Now, the reason why this is not, you know, as great of a change is because you're now going to have to prioritize your Heartstrike over things like your bone armor, and that's something that can be really tough to deal with if you need to get your marrow rend up and get your bone armor stacks up. You're going to want to keep everything right above 6 stacks so that your haste doesn't drop off. And when you think about, you know, all the mobs that are attacking you in Mythic Plus, that's going to be something that's harder to monitor. Now, all that being said, it's not all that difficult to keep up bone armor today, so I don't know how big of a challenge this is going to be, but what I will say is I had to make the strategic choice of refreshing bone armor or coupling it with my dancing rune weapon a little bit more than I probably normally would have prior to Death's Due being a passive thing and not tied to Heartstrike. So now every time I cast Heartstrike when Death's Due is down, I get a stack of Death's Due on the target, and I buff my strength by that percentage. It now only stacks up to 8% as well. So not only did Blizzard make it rotationally based, they also nerfed the number of stacks that you can actually get up on a target. So this was kind of a double hit for the DK. A little bit more testing is needed. I still think it can toe the line and be just as good and maybe better than Venthyr, but I think this is something where time will tell. And from a progression perspective, I am not sure how easy it's going to be able to manage all of that at once, while also essentially healing yourself and making sure your runic power is going to the right places. So as of right now, I have Venthyr just slightly edging out Night Fae for DKs. Now the last one is the Kyrian ability, which is Shackle the Unworthy. And I'm going to go ahead and put Shackle the Unworthy just kind of straddling the line here between A and B tier. And a couple of reasons for that. I think that Shackle the Unworthy is a really good Covenant ability. I have an issue with it being single target only. I think if it were something that operated or functioned a little bit more like Death's Due, that would be great. So if you don't know what Shackle the Unworthy is, this is essentially a debuff that's going to be up for 14 seconds, and the skill's on a minute-long cooldown. And this debuff that's up for 14 seconds is going to reduce all the damage that single target deals to you by 5%. Now, that's not a lot, right? 5% is not a lot, but hey, the Night Fae ability's only 8%. The difference is that the Night Fae ability, because your Heartstrike is going to hit likely at least 3 targets while you're sitting in Death's Due, you're mitigating roughly 24% of the incoming damage if you've got 3 mobs hitting you there, versus still just flat 5% mitigation if you go Kyrian. So that's why, to me, even though Kyrian is strong right now, the fact that it's being, that the Death Knight is even in the AB tier with Kyrian is more due to the fact that Death Knight is just a strong tank class right now, and less about the Kyrian ability itself. So I think that Blizzard can fix this by making it work or function a little bit more like Death's Due. Not saying that it should replace Death and Decay by any means, but just saying that if you cast it, maybe it's like a frontal cone or something that allows you to get this up on multiple targets. That would be awesome. Now, the thing I really do like about this is that it has incredibly high uptime. So as you're using your rune spenders against the target that has Shackle the Unworthy up, you are actually reducing the cooldown of Shackle the Unworthy by 4 seconds per rune spender. So you're going to get anywhere between 24 to 32 seconds off of the cooldown, which means you're going to roughly have a 50 to 60% uptime on Shackle the Unworthy. Now, the Night Fae uptime is going to be higher simply because of the fact that you're going to get your Crimson Scorch rocks and you're going to be able to get free cast of Death's Due. So that's just something to keep in mind as it relates to just kind of the way that we're stack ranking these. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Okay, let's go ahead and pivot over to the Demon Hunter now. Again, I'm going to work my way from the bottom up, and let's go ahead and get going with where I would consider the lowest ranking covenant to be, and that is Night Fae. The reason for that is that the Hunt is the ability that you get, and when I look at each of these abilities, I look at my current toolkit as a Demon Hunter and I say, does this ability give me something I don't already have? Now, the Hunt is a 50-yard charge, essentially, on a 1.5 minute cooldown. In other words, very high mobility. If I'm playing Vengeance Demon Hunter, I already have very high mobility. Now, the one thing it does do is they just increased the damage on it, and they made it so that you can actually run through enemies, and it's actually working now in beta to the point where enemies are getting the debuff, and so it's doing a lot more damage than it was in the preliminary testing if you watch some of my previous videos. This will also heal you for 25% of the damage that you end up dealing to the Hunt target for 30 seconds. So it's something that is up for a while, and it's something that will give you a nice little heal. But again, as a Demon Hunter, I'm doing a pretty good job already healing myself. There's multiple different talent specs that you can run that are viable as a Demon Hunter, all of which can give you more souls that you can go ahead and eat up and heal. So when I look at just, Night Fae versus everything else, Night Fae is coming in last for me for Demon Hunter right now. My next one is Fodder to the Flame, and that is going to be the Necrolord ability, and it is just going to finish slightly below Night Fae right now. So I'm sorry, I'm mixing up the order a little bit, but it's coming in slightly below Night Fae simply because even though they increased they changed the mechanic a little bit. So now it is no longer you attack faster. Now it's actually a 10% haste increase, which is really nice that they did that. But the way that this works, and don't get me wrong, I will start by saying this Covenant ability is what I think is probably the most fun Covenant ability of any of the tank Covenant abilities. This is where you summon a demon that only you can see, and you have a duel to the death. You kill the demon, and then where it dies, a giant pool of demon blood spawns, and as long as you stand in that ring of blood, you get this buff, and you get some mitigation along with it, and it's something that ultimately feels really good because it's 10% reduction to incoming damage from all sources, and it's 10% haste increase. So your rotation feels better, you're taking less damage, you're putting out more damage, everything's come together, and then all of a sudden, you have to move. Why? Because, the next dungeon boss, or, because the boss moves over here, and it's at this point in time in the fight. So the fact that you don't get to keep the buff when you can't stand still is a crazy, crazy, crazy big problem for Demon Hunters right now. I hope that Blizzard fixes this, because this could be easily the best one for Demon Hunters. If only Blizzard made it so that as long as you step into the pool, you just kind of dip into it for a second, you walk away, and you take with you a 30-second buff that is your haste increased and your damage reduction. Like, that would be fantastic if Blizzard did that. But as of right now, you literally have to stay still. You're not playing a Vengeance Demon Hunter because you want to stand still, and more often than not, you're gonna be forced to move. I mean, that's the mechanic in just about every fight, is you have to move out of something. And so standing still for the sake of a 10% damage mitigation and 10% haste buff that just falls off the second that you leave the pool, that doesn't feel any good. So Necrolord is actually my last one. Night Fae is number 2 for Demon Hunter. Now, for number 3, we're gonna go ahead and go with the Kyrian ability for Demon Hunter, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to put this in my A tier for Demon Hunter. And a couple of things here. The ability is called Elysian Decree. All this is it's another sigil, and this sigil it was just buffed. It does a little bit more damage now, but it detonates to deal 350% of attack power, and 3 lesser soul fragments are going to, you know, erupt from the targets. It gives you more soul fragments to go ahead and eat up, and it's just something that gives you a little bit more reliability in terms of just your self-healing overall. It's on a 1-minute cooldown. It fits in just like the rest of your other sigils. It just becomes a rotational sigil, but it has value in every piece of content because you can use it on bosses, you'll get lesser fragments. You can use it on trash, you'll get lesser fragments, and it'll do a bunch of damage to that group. So that's something that's nice, is that it's high damage, it gives you some healing utility, allows you to eat up some more souls, and you're kind of off to the races. But what I will say is that it's a rather boring ability. That's not what we're scoring here. It's just rather boring. You already have your 4 sigils if you're spec'd into chains, and there's kind of, you know, to add in yet another one, it just, you know, it doesn't feel the best. What I will say is if you do alt Havoc, it works very well with Havoc right now. It gives Havoc a little bit more utility. So there's some good synergy there between the 2 specs. So not a lot of complaints there, just kind of boring, but it performs very well. Now our last one is going to be the Venthyr for our Demon Hunter. And we're going to put this slightly below, but very close to our DK. The reason for this is that the DK is still a little bit more tanky than your Demon Hunter. You can do some things with conduits, and you can do some things with your legendaries to fix this. But overall, Demon Hunter as Venthyr is doing some really good things right now. Venthyr also, again, is doing really well from a Havoc perspective in terms of the damage output. So what you get by going with the Venthyr Covenant as a Demon Hunter is Sinful Brand. Sinful Brand is essentially a dot that you cast on a single target, which reduces their melee speed and their spell casting speed by 30%. So as a Vengeance Demon Hunter, I look at that and I say, okay, everything, you know, this one mob is attacking me slower, therefore that's some passive mitigation right there. However, they just increased the dot on this. It inflicts 520% of your attack power as shadow damage over 8 seconds. So it's a shorter dot, 8 seconds, but it's only on a 1-minute cooldown. So that was the cool part. Now the really neat part, and the one that kind of spices this up a little bit, is that when you activate your Metamorphosis and you go all demo on your enemies, when you cast Sinful Brand, it becomes an AoE. So it hits everything in the area that's right next to you, and it's a crazy strong dot. Like it hits like a freaking Mack truck, but it also slows down the cast speed and the melee attack speed of all the enemies around you. So those challenging trash packs or those challenging bosses, if you time it right, you can make it so that you're picking up ads and ultimately they've got their debuff on them for 8 seconds. You're going to do a ton of damage. Like it's going to pump out crazy threat. So that's where I have currently Sinful Brand ahead of Curion right now. It's also a lot less boring, and it's super cool to be able to use and kind of function in conjunction with Metamorphosis. Alright, so for our next one, we are onto Druid. Let's go ahead and jump in. So at the bottom of the barrel currently for Druids, and again, I have to preface this by saying Druid is a strong tank right now, a very strong tank in beta. So they're going to score fairly high across the board, but you will see some nuance as it relates to, just the Covenant abilities themselves. So as far as the bottom of the barrel Druid, where are we going? We are going to the Venthyr. And the reason why we're going Venthyr is because you are granted a skill called Ravenous Frenzy. And over this time frame, this is the good part, you're going to have a 20-second buff that is going to increase your damage, your healing, and your haste by 2%, and that's going to stack for the duration. If you spend, however, and this is the negative part, and this is the only Covenant ability for Druid that actually has a negative drawback to it, if you spend more than a second and a half idle, where you don't push any buttons, then Frenzy overcomes you, consuming 1% of your health per stack, stunning you for 1 second, and ending. That doesn't sound like an effect that you want to have in a crucial boss fight, where, if you think of current content, and we'll use the first boss of Nyalotha, because just about everyone has seen it, or at least a video, Wrathion flat outright disappears at a certain point. And if I have that thing up, or even if it's ending, I don't necessarily want it to start chipping away at my health. I don't want it to stun me. I don't want it to do goofy things, especially if I'm trying to pick up ads, whatever it may be, right? So just the fact that it comes with a negative is definitely not a good thing. I also will say that this is on a longer cooldown. It's a 3-minute cooldown as of right now, and so it becomes more of like a single target or a boss type cooldown that you use, or one that's a heavily strategic trash pack. So overall, if they shorten it and they kind of remove maybe the negative piece of it as a tank, then sure. But early on in the expansion, I'm a little apprehensive of any kind of negative things happening to me as a tank, only because healers are quite frankly, some of them are struggling right now in the content that I've seen to keep up, and some of them are having mana issues. So I'd like to help my healers out as much as possible early on within Shadowlands launch. So our next one is actually going to be our Necrolords, and this one's going to be placed slightly above our Venthyr, and the reason for that is that it grants you something called Adaptive Swarm. Now, this is a dot hot ability, and I'll explain that in a second, but this is something that is on a 25-second cooldown right now, so this is something that becomes very highly rotational, which actually feels really good from a gameplay perspective to be able to push this button. But ultimately, the way that this works is that you command a swarm, assuming of insects, that deals 120% of spell power over 12 seconds, and then increases the effectiveness of your periodic effects on them by 20%. So let's start there. So the dot portion lasts for 12 seconds. It's a relatively weak dot. However, it increases the overall effectiveness of your other dots. So think of Moonfire here. Think of other, think of even your Thresh to a certain extent. So those are all going to hit harder, 20% harder to be exact. After those 12 seconds are up, Adaptive Swarm then jumps to a friendly target and is going to heal them over the course of 12 seconds. And then it's going to jump back to an enemy for the last 12 seconds, where you're also going to go ahead and you're going to get the buff on a friendly target. So you're going to see 20% extra healing on them. And then you're going to get the buff on the debuff back on a unfriendly target, which is going to increase the effectiveness of your periodic damages by 20%. So keep that in mind, is that this is something that is likely going to find its place. It's likely going to end up being relatively strong, but overall it is not something that I'm likely going to customize my druid and say, yep, I'm gonna go Necrolords for this reason and this reason only. You could even boost up Druid maybe a little bit with Necrolords, and actually that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slightly move it up to just kind of be right in between an A and B tier. And the reason for that is that it comes with Fleshcraft, and it's the only Covenant ability that comes with, really a tanky, absorption shield. So that's something that's nice to have. Granted, it's only 20% baseline, but it can scale up to 50%, and Guardians are known for large health pools, right? So that's the cool thing about that. So that sums up Druid in a nutshell. We're going to go ahead, or I should say that sums up Druid Necrolords in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and jump over to our next one, which is going to be Kindred Spirits. So Kindred Spirits is our Kyrian Covenant ability. If you watched my previous video where I went ahead and I ranked all of the Druid Covenant abilities, you'll notice that I've kind of flip-flopped here. The reason for that is that Kindred Spirits is something that is really nice when you're essentially just casting on yourself or another tank. If you don't know what it is, it's like Spirit Bond, that old talent that Druids used to have. But this is where you form a bond with an ally. And every 1 minute, you can essentially empower that bond for 10 seconds, which grants you an effect based on whatever your partner's role is. If your partner is a damage dealer, you get Kindred Empowerment, where you grant them 30% of your damage as additional damage, healing, or absorption. If it's a healer, you get Kindred Focus. This focuses on your bonded partner, replicating 30% of all healing that you deal to them. And then as a tank, you get Kindred Protection, which is what we're talking about today. This is where you protect your bonded partner. You redirect 40% of your damage that they take to you unless you fall below 20% health. So as a tank, as a guardian, that's what you're getting is Kindred Protection, which is essentially just a redirect of damage, 40% of the damage that they're taking. So it's a nice button for maybe progression, or people are messing up a little too often. The thing that I actually got out of it, that I really enjoyed from Kindred Spirits, is that you could cast it on yourself, and then you become, you know, the Lone Protector is the buff that you get, and that actually mitigates, you know, an extra 10% of damage on a 1 minute cooldown for you. So you just have a nice passive mitigation for 10%. Stacks really well with Bark Skin, so you can buff your Bark Skin because it's on the same cooldown. So it's one that I really liked having at the time, especially when you start to pair legendary effects and all that. But overall, as I started to zoom out and I looked at the class as a whole, I'm thinking, you know, if you're someone like me who likes to play, you know, a class and not just a spec of a class, then to be quite honest with you, if you play any other Druid spec, Kyrian suddenly drops down and it's not nearly as good as what Night Fae is, and that's where we're going to go ahead and that's where we're going to go next. So Night Fae coming out on top right now for Guardian Druid after some of the changes that we've seen. Convoke the Spirits looks really good, guys. It's if you're not familiar with the ability, it's on a 2 minute cooldown right now, which is really nice because those shorter cooldowns, I feel like when you get to 3 minutes or more, it's tougher because you want to save those cooldowns for boss fights or, you know, progression content or whatever it is that you're trying to push past. When something's on 2 minutes or less, it becomes something that you can use a little bit more freely, and that's the way I feel about Convoke the Spirits. So this is where you call upon the Night Fae for an eruption of energy, channeling a rapid flurry of 12 Druid spells and abilities over the course of 4 seconds. This is going to favor the spec that you're currently in. So for Guardian, it's going to cast more Thrashes than anything else. So this is something that you can pair with a couple legendaries, like one that increases your Thresh stack threshold by 1, bringing it to potentially 4. There's a lot of really good options here, and Druids have some really cool, fun, and exciting, and right now broken legendaries that are likely going to see some nerfs. So when you kind of take out the legendaries and you just look at what the skill is, and that skill is alone, right now Druids are finishing, or I should say the Convoke the Spirits is finishing a little bit higher than the Kyrian. It's actually, let me drop this down a little bit. I'd say it's right on par with the DK in terms of Venthyr right now, and hopefully what DK ends up coming up to in the Night Fae. So you've got some really good options here. As you can see, there's viability so far. We're 3 tank specs in. There's viability across Druid, DH, and DK right at the top. There's only a couple that I would avoid, and in all honesty, you know, some of them are more PvP oriented. Like if we go back and we just look at Demon Hunter real quick, you know, the Hunt, or I'm sorry, Fodder to the Flame is one that you're not really going to be standing still all that often, so that's why it's all the way down here. But things like the Hunt, you know, there's still a lot of viability here in PvE and PvP because that's a really long charge. So I just kind of want to go back and just pause as we're halfway through and just kind of say all of these are viable. They're all really close right now. It's just that these Covenant abilities are just boosting them in one way, shape, or form. All right, so that is going to bring us to Monk, and Monk was a tougher one for me. I've been maining a Monk for the last 2 expansions for the most part, both Mistweaver, Windwalker, and Brewmaster. Not both, but I should say all of those 3. Just kind of rotated in between, mostly Mistweaver and Windwalker in Legion, and now mostly Brewmaster and Windwalker in BFA. And overall, this is a tough one for me to score. After looking through every single one of them, and just kind of as I compare against the rest of the classes, the changes that were made to Brewmaster in terms of the way that they function, and I have a video just on the changes, so I won't go too in depth here. The changes that were made ultimately changed the way I look at Brewmaster going forward, especially given the fact that Stagger's not something you're actively managing anymore, and it becomes more rotational, and instead you're going back to that typical like guard monk mentality with Celestial Brews. So I tried to find as much synergy as possible with the Covenant traits to make my decision here. And I also tried to think about, in the current state of the game as well as in beta, what is it that I am lacking? Am I having a tough time keeping up a debuff? Am I struggling to gain aggro on X, Y, or Z for these reasons, and so on and so forth? The way that I stack rank these might sound a little goofy, but hopefully I can get you to understand. So the first one that I'm going to go ahead and shout out is the Brewmaster Night Fae Covenant ability. So this one is my lowest scoring Brewmaster right now. The reason for that is that you get Phalanx Stomp with this one, which actually does a lot more damage now. They increased this overall, which is a nice change and is going to help with threat, because that was a problem for Brewmasters, believe it or not. At least early on when you have no gear, and then it continues to get better in scale with gear. But the passive effect that you get with Phalanx Stomp as a Brewmaster is that it ignites all enemies with Breath of Fire. And that's incredibly underwhelming to me, because I cannot say that in beta or in live right now I struggle to keep that debuff on my enemies at all. It's just something that becomes part of your rotation. I barely think about it. The uptime on it is exactly where I need it to be. I don't necessarily need any help getting Breath of Fire on my enemies. So the only thing that you'd be getting by going with Night Fae right now as a Brewmaster is the additional throughput that comes with Phalanx Stomp, and they did buff the damage on it, so that, damage equates to more threat, means, higher likelihood of keeping aggro on everything. You also have the ability to potentially, while you stand and fight on the Phalanx, refresh the cooldown of Phalanx Stomp, and you can go ahead and cast it again. And that's proccing, at 6%. So it's pretty decent right now to have a 6% chance of getting that off cooldown and just having it readily available for packs that are living a little bit longer. But overall, when I looked at what I was getting with Phalanx Stomp, I was not overly impressed, and I wish it had just worked a little bit differently. I'll say that this is a dead tie for me, this next one. I've got Brewmaster and Venthyr right now as my number 2/4B, I guess. A two-way tie for the bottom ranks here. The reason for that is a few things. You get the ability Fallen Order. This is where you open a portal that calls your dead monk buddies from the past, and it calls different adepts, spirits of the adepts. You get fallen oxes, you get fallen cranes, and fallen tigers. So oxes are your Brewmasters, cranes are your Mistweavers, tigers are your Windwalkers, and that portal stays open for 24 seconds. Every 2 seconds, it summons one of your spirits, and each of those spirits is up for 6 seconds. However, the spec that you're currently in, those adepts, so the Ox adepts, are going to hang out for an extra 2 seconds, so you're going to get 8 seconds out of those. So that's a lot. That's a lot there to unpack. And as I thought about it more and as I tested it more, I did not like Fallen Order for the reason that as a Brewmaster Monk, and one thing you had to really come to terms with in BFA is that you rely on your healers more than any other class, as far as a tank is concerned. Even though they made changes to give you a little bit more throughput on your self-healing for a monk, that's still very much the case. And when I thought about why Blizzard made the choice of extending the current spec that you're in, I didn't think that made too much sense, other than just saying, oh, it's class identity. It doesn't really help gameplay all that much, because I would very much rather have more of my Fallen Adepts be Crane and heal me up in a time of need. And the reason for that is that this is a 3-minute cooldown ability, Fallen Order. And with a 3-minute cooldown, again, I've mentioned before, at the 3-minute threshold, that's where I start thinking, okay, this is probably more of a boss fight than anything. So, why am I going to be blowing this too often, from a trash perspective? It's just, I don't know, it's not strong enough right now. The fact that the Ox Adepts are up longer, and the main thing that they do is, again, cast Breath of Fire, it's essentially the same thing as taking Phalanx Stomp right now. So, again, still very viable. You can see they're towing the line at B tier right now. But you're getting Breath of Fire out of it. The only thing that would edge out the Venthyr ability for a Brewmaster is the fact that because you do get the Fallen Tiger and the Fallen Crane Adepts, the fact that you do get those out there at all is nice, because that gives you a little extra healing and it gives you a little extra damage throughput as well. But that's the only thing that might give it the edge. I may still end up going with Night Fae just for the ability to pump out that extra damage on my own. So just something to think about. I think this could be made stronger if Blizzard kind of flipped it around and kind of said, okay, as a Brewmaster, your Crane Adepts are going to last longer, and they're going to stick around, and they're going to heal you for a longer period than every other Adept that you have out. For Windwalker, maybe it'll give you, the Brewmasters to make sure that the damage done to you is mitigated by your 5% that you get from Breath of Fire. And as a Mistweaver, because you're fist weaving more often than not, maybe the Windwalker or the Tiger Adepts hang around a little bit longer. I think that's a better way to rework it so that there's better synergy across all of the specs for Monk. That's just my idea. I doubt that it's going to happen, but I think that would be actually pretty cool if they ended up doing that. So my next one is going to be, again, a very controversial. I think it'll be controversial, at least just based on some of the stuff that I've seen. We're going to start to get a little crowded around here, so I'm going to start to overlap. But we've got Curian, which is going to go to the AB tier, just slightly below Death Knights right now, for Monk. And the reason for that is it's because it's Weapons of Order. If you don't know what ability you get if you go with the Curian, and Weapons of Order is on a 2-minute cooldown, so you can be a little bit more liberal to it. But all this is going to do is it's going to give you a 30-second mastery buff. That's it. 30-second mastery buff. The only thing that you get out of that, other than that, is the ability to reset your Keg Smash, which, it is nice. It's certainly nice. But the fact that you don't, if you're running the legendary that gives you 2 Keg Smashes, it doesn't reset both of those stacks. It only resets 1. So to me, it's just okay right now. And it's mainly just okay because it's rather boring. It's not anything that really took any thought. It's like, hey, what can we give monks? Hey, let's just give them mastery. That'll help them. Okay, cool. Yeah, every single one of those specs is going to benefit from mastery. So let's do that, right? So it's up for 30 seconds though, so it's a nice little throughput secondary stat buff that you're going to be able to get as long as you have Weapons of Order up. But other than that, it's boring. It doesn't really add to your gameplay at all. You set it, you forget it. And they're still going to tweak that, I think, a little bit. I'm not saying that they're going to tweak the effect that it has, but I think that they might play with the numbers a little bit more because it was a little strong. It was testing a little strong for Windwalker, and they tweaked it a little bit this week, but I think they have a little bit more to do. So we'll see where that one ends up shaking out. Now, for our last one, Necrolords is going to slightly be above our Curian ability, and the reason for this is because I think Blizzard did a really good job with the design of this, and I don't think they're going to let this thing die. The reason I say this is because you're granted the ability Bone Dust Brew. This is where you're going to get yet another brew. So you've already got your Celestial Brew, you've got your Purifying Brew, you've got Fortified Brew, but Fortified Brew doesn't count for what we're talking about. So Celestial, Purifying, and Bone Dust Brew are your 3 main brews that I'm going to be talking about here. And the reason why I really like the way that they designed this is that you use Bone Dust Brew to coat all the targets, in front of you. There's no target cap, so you're able to hit everything within an area of effect that is just a big circle that you put on the ground. Your abilities then have a 35% chance of affecting the target a second time at 35% effectiveness as damage or healing. So in our case, damage, right? I really like this ability because it gives you more damage, but it also means more threat. You're hitting them multiple times. The main reason, though, I really like this is because it's on a 1-minute cooldown, which can be shortened just by doing your rotation. So in the same way that you shorten the cooldown on your Celestial Brew and your Purifying Brew, which is Tiger Palm and Keg Smash, as you're hitting those buttons and you're reducing the cooldown of Purifying and Celestial, you're also reducing the cooldown of Bone Dust Brew. And that's just really good class design. I really like the synergy across all of your brews there. I like the fact that they tied Bone Dust Brew to work in conjunction with Celestial and Purifying Brew. with Keg Smash and Tiger Palm. I thought that was really neat design. And then, you know, the other reason why this slightly is going to edge out Kyrian is because you're able to get that absorption shield that comes through Fleshcraft anywhere between 20 and 50% of your baseline health. You're going to have a smaller shield than other classes because Brewmasters just don't have as much health. But I think it's of tremendous value just to have a little extra something, make you a little bit more tanky. And you combine that with your Celestial Brew and then the Purifying Brew charges that can increase the effectiveness of your Celestial Brew, you're really onto something. So I think Necrolords as a Brewmaster is the way to go as it stands right now. We'll see. We'll see, though. We're a month out. Okay, the chart is getting a little crowded. We can pull some trends, though, here before we get into our last two. You look at Kyrian, and it's pretty strong for just about every tank class right now. It's not necessarily a bad choice. You got Night Fae, which there's a good mix. Venthyr, there's a good mix. And Necrolords is a little bit lower than I would have thought they would have been overall, just kind of reading baseline skills. After testing, that's mostly what influenced these decisions here. But we're going to go ahead and get into Paladin next. And I'm going to go ahead and start with what I think is the absolute worst Paladin skill right now. And it's mainly because of the incredibly long cooldown. Paladins, again, they're balanced pretty darn well with the rest of the classes. So this is going to be tougher to do. We're going to start to see a little bit more overlap here. So hopefully it doesn't get too cluttered for you guys. But Paladin is going to go ahead and drop in a little bit lower on our Venthyr list with the Ashen Hollow ability. Ashen Hollow, let me start this off. A 4-minute cooldown right now, guys. 4 freaking minutes for this cooldown to actually work. This is where you're going to hollow the target area for 30 seconds. So when the uptime, when you think about the percentage versus the amount of time it's on cooldown, oh my gosh, like just it's not enough. It's not enough. What this does, though, is it's a massive AoE. Like, if you have not seen this thing, like, it covers such a huge, massive area that there's no way that anyone in your party or raid should not be standing in this thing when you cast it. So that's the good news. But what ends up happening is that it damages enemies in the area for 30 seconds. So it's a giant, like, consecrate that lasts for 30 seconds. And I mean giant, like, huge. The thing that it does, though, for your allies is that they're healed for, you know, a percentage of your spell power. And the problem with that is that the second you get into a raid setting, it starts to have diminishing returns. So it scales very well up to 5 targets. As soon as there are more than 5 friendly targets within your Ashen Hollow, it starts to be reduced, and you start to see diminishing returns on that. I think that's really, really poor design, and makes it so that you're literally just saying, hey, run Prot Pally for Venthyr if you're just going to do Mythic Plus. However, the one nice thing is that it acts as like a mini wings, because when you are standing within the hollow, and trust me, you're always going to be standing within Ashen Hollow, this thing's massive, you can use Hammer of Wrath on any target, and its damage is increased by 100%. So you're going to get twice the amount of damage that you would out of your Hammer of Wrath if you're casting it on a target that was low health. You can cast it on a target that's on any health, but overall, this is just not a very good design on anything outside of just Mythic Plus. I wish that it was, and I also wish that the cooldown was a lot lower. 4 minutes is just insane, in my opinion. You're only going to use that on boss fights. There's no other reason to use that for anything else other than boss fights. All right. So our next one is going to be our Necrolords, and we're going to go ahead and put them right here in between our DK. I'm going to go even a little bit more in between our DK and our DH. We've got our Paladin for Necrolords. This is going to grant you the ability Vanquisher's Hammer. This is something that's on a 30-second cooldown, and this is where you throw a hammer at your target that deals a percentage of your spell power as shadow damage, and it empowers your next Word of Glory to automatically trigger Shield of the Righteous. So this gives you a couple of things. It gives you an extra damaging ability that then turns into a passive ability that then turns into a shield. And that is nice, right? So there's a lot of good functionality there. The way I view this one is that this becomes your rotational Pally ability that is just something that you have every 30 seconds. you're just going to blindly hit it because you can always do with that extra passive mitigation. You can always automatically trigger your Shield of the Righteous. We'll take that. So there's really no downside to this one, but it's just not overly strong right now. It's not dealing a ton of damage. And Pallies right now are probably the top damage dealers that I've seen, at least in Mythic Plus, from a tank perspective. So overall, this is just not doing what I think it could be doing. We have a month to see changes to this, and I hope that we do. But as of right now, Pally Necrolords is going to finish, right above the Venthyr. For our next one, I was a little surprised by this, but after messing with it, I started to have a really good time. We're going to go ahead and put our Paladin Night Fae kind of in between our A and B, but still mostly B. And the reason for that is because you get a buff called the Blessing of the Seasons. And this is essentially 4 buffs in one. You're going to cast it, I believe it's a 45-second cooldown right now where you cycle through the buffs, but you're always going to, or it might even be 30 seconds, but you're always going to have the uptime on it. And you start with Blessing of the Spring, Blessing of the Summer, Blessing of the Autumn, and Blessing of the Winter. And they each do different things. Some of them will increase attack speed, some of them will reduce damage coming into you, one of them will make it so that you deal damage as like winter damage, so cold, and it'll slow the move speed of it. So you cycle through each one of these buffs. It's going to be something that's it's going to take a lot of management. You're going to have to macro the ability. You're going to have to do mouse overs. You're going to have to do a number of things to make sure that you're casting on the right target, because it doesn't always make sense to cast it on yourself. So that one's going to be a little bit more nuanced in its playstyle. I think that's one that could scale actually really well and bring a lot of group utility, kind of as we go further and further down the expansion. But as of right now, it just is kind of like, in starter gear, like it's not all that good. And I have a feeling that people are not going to use this ability correctly. They're not going to maximize the overall buffs that they're granting themselves and others. And so for that, it's very risky to kind of put it above the other two. But I'm going to for now, just because of what the potential is and where it could be if played right. What I will say is, this is all kind of moot because as of right now, the Kyrian Paladin is doing really, really, really crazy and good things. I'm gonna go ahead and put them right here in the A tier for Kyrian. If you don't know what you get if you go Kyrian as a Paladin, you may have been living under a rock, because this has been one of the longest talked about Covenant abilities, because when it first was released, everyone's like, there's no freaking way Blizzard's going to go live with that because it's too good. And that's true. It's gone through several iterations so far. But what you're granted is an ability called Divine Toll. This is where you can instantly cast either, and this is spec specific, a Holy Shock, Avenger Shield, or Judgment on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. So, the fact that we're talking Protection Paladin here, that's 5 Avenger Shields that are going to hit targets within 30 yards. This works really well with some legendary effects. It makes it so that you constantly are just tossing shields around Captain America style. It feels really nice to be able to do that. It's a lot of damage that ends up going out, and it's just really cool to see, that ability proc other abilities, and just it all just kind of works, and Paladin just kind of works in Kyrian. I don't know that there's a lot of debate there. There may be some wishful thinking about some of these other abilities, but Paladin Kyrian, it just is in prot right now. It just looks so freaking good, and it feels really strong and deals a lot of damage with Divine Toll in the mix there. So that's Divine Toll is on a 1-minute cooldown, and that's probably the only downside, is that you can only throw 5 shields at once every 1 minute. But beggars can't be choosers, because it's a really strong ability. All right, we have one class left, and that is the Warrior. This one is a little weird, only because I'm not overly fond of the Warrior Covenant abilities right now. I don't know what it is, but that's just the Covenant abilities. I will say that Warrior is actually in a pretty good state overall. They've gotten their buff that they need. They've gotten the extra survivability that they need. I will say that there are certain things about warrior that you have to be less reliant on. Ignore pain is one of them. You need to just flat out reduce the incoming damage sometimes instead of just hitting that ignore pain button on cooldown. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that, you know, your rage is not just all going to be dumped into that. There's going to be more nuance to your rotation if you actually want to live as a warrior. So there are some good changes to the class that make it feel like almost like Burning Crusade Prot Warrior, actually. You got some good baseline talents like Shockwave in there, and a few others that I really enjoy. So let's go ahead and jump in and start talking a little bit about Warrior. I'm going to go ahead and put my first Warrior into Kyrian, and this is not scoring overly well right now. The reason for that is because Kyrian grants you Spear of Bastion, and Spear of Bastion is, I don't know, it doesn't have the utility that I'm personally looking for. So when I look at it, it's on a 1 minute cooldown right now, and this is where you throw a spear at a target location. It does initial damage, and then it does damage over 4 seconds. The problem is that this does not scale beyond 5 targets again, so this is a diminishing returns kind of skill. And then the spear, as long as it's up, is going to tether the mobs to that location. So it becomes something that, to me, almost feels like a PvP ability that they're trying to make work in PvE, and it doesn't necessarily feel all that good when it comes to tanking, because there's no utility other than the tethering, and the second that spear is gone, that's it. It does generate 25 rage, so it's a good initial rage builder, but I don't see the value beyond that. So it's worth calling out, and there's not much to say here because I wish there was. Kyrian had done fairly strong for our other tanks. It just is really missing the mark for our warriors right now. It needs a little something extra, needs some mitigation, needs something against single target or boss fights that actually works. This other than just, you know, doing flat outright damage, because you're not going to tether a boss. You know, that's not going to happen, and what's the point of doing so? You're likely keeping it as still as possible until you have to move for whatever mechanic anyway. So it's just not working very well and doesn't have a lot of really good flow from a tank perspective. Okay, my next one is actually a big step up in terms of tank capabilities, and that's going to put the warrior, well, let me go ahead and get it moved here. That's going to put the warrior right on par with you know, demon hunters, brewmasters, paladins within the Night Fae ability here. And the reason for that is because you get something that's very similar to Phalanx Stomp for monks. You get something called Ancient Aftershock, which is essentially where you unleash a wave of anima that looks like Phalanx Stomp, which deals a significant amount of damage, 220% of your attack power as nature damage to up to 5 enemies, and it knocks them down for 1.5 seconds. So it becomes kind of a mini stun. The Ancient Aftershock will actually stay out on the field battle after that, and the ground is going to continue to expel anima, and it'll deal a percentage of your attack power as nature damage to up to 5 enemies, and then it'll generate 16 rage per enemy over 12 seconds. Every 3 seconds, though, so you're going to get 4 intervals of this. Every 3 seconds, targets are briefly knocked down. So this brings a lot of utility to something like Mythic Plus, and that scene where this starts to lose value is against single target or boss fights, because I don't see, you know, big fat dragons falling over every 3 seconds. I'm sure that's not the way that that's going to work. So the benefit that you're getting is going to be ultimately the rage that you're going to be refunded back just by using Ancient Aftershock. It's on a 1.5 minute cooldown though, so it's something that you, as much as you want to be a little bit more liberal about it, you just can't be. But just the amount of range that you generate makes you incredibly tanky, depending on how you're spending that rage. So it still is incredibly viable in single target, and it really puts warriors up on the, you know, more of an equal footing with some of the other tank classes. So that's something to keep in mind here, and this is why, or one that I wanted to call out and spend a little bit more time on explaining, just because it works a lot like Phalanx Stomp, but on a longer cooldown, and it does things like what the Venthyr DK does, where it generates the runic power. This is generating rage for you. So this is still pretty darn good. And actually, you know what? This belongs up probably just fully in B tier. Didn't mean to straddle that line. It's right there. It gives you everything that you need. It just starts to lose a little bit of its functionality in single target, which is probably the only reason why it's not A tier. But again, that rage generation, and depending on how this scales by the time it goes live, like this could be something that it jumps up to A tier for warriors in real quick order. Our next one is going to be Conqueror's Banner, and the reason for that is because I look at things like movement. So Conqueror's Banner is going to put warrior in Necrolords, and the way that this works is it's on a 3-minute cooldown, so again it becomes more of a single target or a boss type fight, unless again it's a very difficult trash pack. This is where you plant a flag in the ground. We've had spells like this before, and it grants 20% maximum health and 10% critical strike to you and 2 allies within 15 yards of the banner. So, and that lasts for 20 seconds. So it's always going to be able to hit you, and then as long as 2 other allies are within 15 yards of the banner, it'll also grant it to them. This acts as kind of like a mini last stand, but with some additional throughput, given the fact that you have 10% critical strike. So that can be something that is actually really nice. If you when this is active and you spend 20 rage, you're also going to be granted Glory. Glory is a buff that increases your critical strike damage by 1% per stack, up to 30% for 30 seconds. So this is something that you can build, like a giant pack of mobs or something before you go ahead and pull a boss. This is something that you build and you can run into a fight because it lasts for 30 seconds. You can run into a fight with a buff that buffs your critical strike. Not necessarily the most tanky effect, but at least it's something, because the thing I don't like about it is that you can't move beyond 15 yards of the banner while it's up, because you've got that buff for 20 seconds. And I don't like, in the same way that I didn't like the Demon Hunter having to fight in the pool of blood, I certainly don't like having Warrior kind of be stuck in place. It just is not something that necessarily feels good, but it brings utility to the group, and it actually gives a little bit more viability to the rest of your group. It gives them some like I said, a mini last stand that you can share without having to have the legendary that shares last stand. So it's something that's nice as a baseline for a Covenant ability. Now my next one is the last one remaining, and it's actually going to be pretty darn close to where I have the Necrolord ability, and that is Venthyr. This one is so goofy because it has value at the beginning of a fight and towards an end of a fight. If you're talking about trash, or even if you're talking about, single target boss fight, or, whatever, Torghast, whatever you're running, the value for this ability scales based on the health percentage of whatever it is that you're fighting. So Condemn is something that is going to completely replace Execute for you. Condemn is where you make a foe suffer for their sins, right? So there's the thematic part of it. But this causes up to a percentage of attack power. Currently, it's 2 times 92.2% of attack power as shadow damage. It's only going to be usable, and this is where this gets a little funky. It's only going to be usable on enemies who are above 80% health or below 20% health. So you have a 40% health pool range in which this can be effective. Now, as a tank, the reason why this is a good thing is that early on in a fight, whether it's Mythic Plus or Raid or whatever, that first 20%, you can sit there and you can condemn the target, and this actually is going to give you extra mitigation. This weakens the primary target and prevents up to a percentage of damage that they would have dealt to you. So right now it's like a 0.6 multiplier times your attack power times 2 plus blah 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 blah, so on and so forth. So there's the math of it all, but it's flat out damage reduction to you every time that you cast Condemn. It's also on a 6-second cooldown, and it costs anywhere between 20 and 40 rage. So it works the same as Execute, and this is something that the harder you hit, the more they're weakened for. So that's kind of a cool mechanic. The reason why I like this is because you can still use this, even though you use it on the front end of the fight. Having it on that last 20% on a boss is something that's really nice in terms of your mitigation as well as your overall damage output, because you're no longer sitting there faced with, shoot, do I need to dump rage into mitigation, or do I need to dump rage into overall damage output? The decision, there is no decision anymore. It's just you mash the condemn button, you get your damage reduction, and then you also get your extra throughput that you would as if it were an execute. So it's actually a pretty neat spell, and because it's only on a 6-second cooldown and it works exactly like execute does, you're actually going to be forced to make some pretty interesting character choices in terms of when you use it, and it really kind of depends on the setting. I would say I got more use out of it for targets that live longer and that hit harder. So overall, those are generally the mobs, whether this is trash or a boss, that are going to give you the most trouble based on the content that you're doing. And so to me, Condemn suddenly stands out as an ability where it does actually become pretty versatile, especially when soloing, like in something like a Torghast. It does become something that that I do want to have on tyrannical weeks, or even on fortified weeks, or even on whatever. There's so many different affixes that you can benefit from, right? And then you also get the benefit in raids from single target boss fights, which as of right now, I believe it's either 3 or 4 of the Castle Nathria boss fights are actually slated to be single target, pending any changes. So as long as that shakes out, like, warriors could be in pretty good spot here, having an execute that also does mitigation for a 40% range of health, the top 20 and the bottom 20. So that's where this one kind of falls in line. So let's go ahead and zoom out now and just kind of look at where everything's falling overall. So again, it's worth stating again, because I encourage you guys to jump around in this video. These are all pretty darn equal. There's not anything that's crazy high above or crazy high below. Right now, I would say that Druids and DKs are probably the best tanks as far as Mythic Plus. DHs, though, are not far behind, either in Curian or in Venthyr. And then the rest of them are right there too. Same with Paladin. I mean, Curian becomes a very crowded covenant for our tanks. We've got, Druid that's very valuable. You have DH, you have Paladin, you have DK, you have Brewmaster. The only one that isn't is Warrior right now, and they just need to add a little bit of extra functionality there. When it comes to Night Fae, you get that extra utility from Convoke with Druids. That feels good. DK just needs a little bit of reworking. I think they're not done with Death's Due yet. We'll see. The fact that they went from 100% passive ramp on that buff and debuff to now having it be rotationally based, I think they double corrected themselves, and I think they're going to meet halfway. They are likely either going to increase the overall buff that you get through the rotation, or they're going to make it passive again. I think they're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere there, and that could bring DK right back up where it was. You've got a couple of options here if you really like Night Fae, in terms of, Paladins. They have to be able to use their buff cycle the right way in order to get the most out of it, but I think that can be very viable. Same with Warrior. I think that's a great rage generator for you. You've got your Demon Hunters that, it's a 1.5 minute cooldown on a glorified charge. But that charge covers an insane range, and it does some good damage as you charge through enemies, and it roots them, and it heals you for 25% of what you deal. So there's some utility there, but I view that more of like a PvP skill. You've got your Monk, which is doing okay right now with Phalanx Stomp. I think they could fix that and make it do a little bit more other than just Breath of Fire. And if they did that and they fixed that and they gave you just a little bit extra out of that, this could go ahead and skyrocket and jump right up there. Then when we look at Venthyr right now, you've got your DK, again, standing above literally everything else. And the main reason for that is because you get your 10% passive dodge, and you get some great runic power generation, which makes you incredibly viable, even more so in Mythic Plus. I would say they probably already were one of the better Mythic Plus runners, if not the best. And just getting that extra runic power makes a huge difference. You got your DHs that are doing awesome things with Sinful Brand, and especially as it synergizes with Metamorphosis. You've got Condemn for warriors that's going to bring them right up here in the Venthyr. And then you've got a couple of still really good options in Druid, Paladin, and Monk for Venthyr. It's just not necessarily, probably what you're looking for. You've got the negative aspects of the Druid where it can stun and actually make you lose some health. The Paladin is just on a crazy long cooldown, so it just doesn't make a ton of sense to go with a 4-minute Hallowed Ground cooldown. And then your Weapons of Order for Monk, I just think it needs to be reworked at this point, and I really hope Blizzard addresses that. As far as Necrolords are concerned, honestly, when you look at this Covenant as a whole, your immediate thought, or at least my immediate thought, was, wow, it comes with a baseline shield as a signature ability. This is going to be a really good one for tanks. But as of right now, it's really doing the best with monks and the Bone Dust brew, because it's synergizing with the ability to reduce the cooldown of all the brews like Purifying and Celestial as well. So monks are doing the best in Necrolords. Warriors are right there. They're not far behind with the Ancient Aftershock because of the amount of rage that it's going to give you when you cast Ancient Aftershock, and being able to dump your rage into more mitigation abilities beyond just Ignore Pain is going to feel really good for people. You've got Druids that are performing pretty darn well with their Adaptive Swarm still, and so that's something to keep in mind as well. You've got your DKs that are also doing pretty darn well in Necrolords. Not the best, this is the Abomination Limb one, and it's more of a Mythic Plus tool and less of a anything else tool. So Mythic Plus and Torghast you'll probably see some benefit to, but if you're a raider, I don't know that I would go DK as it stands right now until they fix Abomination Limb. Paladin, doing pretty strong here, and I would say the worst one right now is Demon Hunter and Necrolords, and it's just because Demon Hunter is just it's too mobile. It's way too mobile of a class to tell them to summon a demon and sit in the demon's blood until it goes away. You need to be able to at least dip into that pool of blood and take that buff with you wherever you end up going in order for this thing to actually be better and to be used. And if they were to do that, DH would probably jump up right into the A tier for Necrolords and probably edge out Brewmasters as it stands right now, given their ability to just self-heal and with meta and everything. So in all honesty, I'm really hoping Blizzard makes some tweaks here. We're going to go ahead and revisit this probably the week before launch. But hopefully you guys were able to draw at least a couple of ideas from this video, or maybe this helped sway you, or maybe it helped you make a decision, and that's ultimately what I hope for. But don't get stuck on that decision. We still have a month left until Shadowlands launches, so revisit this here as we kind of circle back. Maybe the week before Shadowlands we'll try to do this again. Apologies for the longer video, but hopefully the timestamps below help. And happy to hear what your comments are and what your thoughts are. Please share them below. Would love to get everyone talking about some of these abilities.